Welcome to this week's episode of the OGX podcast. We're rebranding the Bet On Me podcast just a bit, giving me, Ashley, and Laura some space to just really go for it, talking about different softball topics, having a question of the week. So this week, we got to really a lot of pitching-specific topics. We talked a little bit about Lexi Kilfoyl's amazing performance against Texas, her 2 shutouts. Got to talk a little bit about Duke's really just rise to the top, number 2 this week. And just what we've seen kind of lead to some of that success over the past few years. Got to comment a little bit on Daniel Laurie's recent Twitter post about sort of competitive spirit meets data, a really interesting topic about sort of like either or and but maybe, or whatever that looks like. And then finally got to take a question from our dear friend Trisha Ford at Texas A&M, where we get into some conversation about pitch counts at the youth level. So lots of great conversation, always fun to be here with Ashley and Laura. So hope you enjoy. All right, we are back not back. We are starting fresh. Decided to change format a bit. We got a lot to say. And so to let me, Ashley, and Laura just touch on some hot softball topics or things that have come up for us that week, keep it a little more free flowing, but also give opportunities for some coaches to ask questions and us to respond on. So we'll have different questions each week. So I'm super excited about the new format and time to just chat softball with the OGX team. So I'm Krista.
I'm Ashley.
Laura.
And so if you already don't know our voices, now you do know who's who. So I made just a list of some things that happened this week in softball, whether that was in our doors here at OGX or in the college game. Hopefully, eventually, we'll talk a little bit about the pro game. But the first thing I wrote down was Kilfoyl had 2 shutouts this weekend against Texas, who obviously has been a pretty strong offensive team. And I think Kilfoyl manages. I don't know that she had, and I don't have it in front of me, but I don't feel like the strikeouts were like a crazy number. So I think that's part of the conversation. But just curious to get your thoughts. Maybe I'll kick it to Ashley first, since this is kind of a pitching question, on what makes someone like Kilfoyl successful, or what you think. Obviously, we were just mentioning we don't have her data, so we're going just based off her eye here. But what we think makes someone like her successful.
I think when I think about Kilfoyl, I really think about the line that I use a lot with athletes when they come for their debriefs, where I'll say, own who you are, really lean into who you are and stop chasing who you're not. And I think she's such a great example of like just owning the tools she's got. So I think it's just such a clear, obviously she has an incredible drop ball. It's coming. You know that what she is going to be throwing you is a pitch with big time sink, and you still can't square it up. And so I think that's a really good conversation starter in a world where we are afraid for people to see data. Like if they see it, then they'll be able to adjust to and hit it. It's like when you face Kilfoyl, it is not a question of what she's going to throw you. It's but it's good enough, and she can command it where she wants. And I think that's a really important topic just generally in our game right now, because we do kind of come from this world in pitching where we think you have to have all the things, right? What variability looks like is to have all of the things. And it kind of reminds me of what we have as this pitching performance summary, where we're like, here's all the ways in which you can be effective as a pitcher. It doesn't mean you have to have every category, big time velo, rock star changeup, big time break in both directions. But you've got to have, obviously it's great to have all of them, but the stronger you are in a single category, the less you need of all the categories. And I think Kilfoyl is just a really good example of that she really leans into that big monstrous drop ball. And it's a great example of how oftentimes a single tool, obviously plus change of speed, but a single tool can own great hitters, not just once, but multiple times through a lineup, 2 games out of 3. I think that's pretty extraordinary. So I think we can learn a lot in our game about that concept. And then in addition to that, I think this idea of us being afraid if someone knows scouting reports. I think this idea of, fooling hitters. Sometimes we can overcomplicate it. If your stuff is that good, if your break is that good and you have that level of command over it, it kind of doesn't matter who the hell knows what it is and what's coming.
Yeah, I was going to say, I almost feel like she has 3 tools, which is a nasty drop ball, and I think I would feel pretty comfortable saying it's at least -8, given the fact that you can see, it has like an arch to it almost with how much drop it has. It's pretty extreme. A change of speeds and a level of commands that's so high on those tools.
Yeah.
I watched all of the games, and obviously Texas has a lot of lefties, less speed. So in some ways, I think Riker and I were talking about like who we thought would win, and he was like, I don't know, Texas's speed. They'll beat out some of ground balls and things that she'll induce, but where she could place that drop ball for the lefties, there were just times where I thought like they just basically like put their bat down, like, yeah, no, like she could just throw it right on that outside corner, which is such a hard spot for lefties to get to for anything, whether they're trying to just beat it out or whatever it is. So I think her level of command on a very, very elite tool is pretty extraordinary and was very fun to watch, and was probably.
I think it's also a good conversation. This week and last week we talked a lot. We did like question of the day at OGX. It was about like command, location, and obviously we are in a game where we are location like obsessed, like hit your spots. I'm very triggered by that phrase. Everyone knows and the reason why I am is because that's what the youth game is driven. The youth game, everyone has 5-6 pitch types, labels, but none of them differentiate themselves, which we all hopefully now know. If not, now. And so there's so many pitch labels, and everything's about just put it in its spot. When in reality, what we know is that go get something great.
Right.
Go
She's
have
59 -3. And hitting that same spot.
Hitting the same spot. It's not the same.
Right.
And so it's like, go get something great from a breaking standpoint. And honestly, I really feel that at the high school level, getting great break, really growing your break profile and like stabilizing what your strengths are, that's what you should be spending your time doing. Command then is college. It's not enough at the college level to just have really good break and not be able to command it. So when you can really pair both of those. So what I think we really get wrong is that we overemphasize command at the high school level. You guys know it drives me freaking insane when we get like feedback maybe from a college coach that says like, I went to see such and such play, but her command was bad. I'm like, who cares right now? That is the piece that's really trainable, but it's difficult to get someone that doesn't have any break to create break. So go after the kid that has the velo range you need with the break profile you need. And then command is the piece that she really goes after in college. So anyway, I really do think that that's a great example of us having to just like reflect on her success, Kilfoyl's success, and then maybe like break it apart as we're doing here to think about like, how do we want to teach our pitchers to ultimately be able to have the, opportunity to be effective at that level? Like, are we setting them up to go after the right things in the right order? And I just think she's a great example of like, the answer is no most of the time, right? You don't need it all. And again, the fact that she has like these limited tools, and I don't mean that in a negative, obviously, and she can just do whatever the hell she wants with it is so powerful.
Yeah. Not to like take away from obviously the other, Oklahoma State pitchers, but the combination of, Kilfoyl and Fouts a couple of years ago with Kilfoyl's drop ball, Fouts' ability to go up at your eyeballs at 72 miles an hour it was a hell of a combination. And to see Lexi take that with her and still be able to harness that, to command it, to like really lean into it. It's refreshing to see a pitcher really know what they're good at and then leverage the hell out of it. It's just something you don't see enough right now. And she does a great job with it.
Yeah, I was also thinking when you were talking, we have a few like really good sync pitchers at the high school level right now who actually will struggle a little bit in high school. Not like massively struggle, but their defense can't make plays behind them. And so I think it goes to your point, Ashley, of like, know also for the college coaches, like what you're looking for and what plays at your level. Your kids are going to make those plays, they're going to make the plays. And so these like drop ball kids might play a little bit better at the collegiate level than they do at the high school level. Obviously, you might go to a high school game and see more of the obviously velo kids, but also the up kids getting more of the swings and misses. And you want that on your staff too. And not saying that won't play, but these drop ball kids obviously have a ton of success at the collegiate level. And I don't know much about Lexi's high school career. I'm sure it was amazing, but sometimes you struggle a little bit because the kids behind you can't make quite the plays that you'll see.
You know what I just thought of? I just thought of like, okay, if we come across a really good drop ball, like a high school level drop ball kid, I mean, I'd bet my house on that they'd say like such and such says now I need to work on my rise.
Right.
Like what we should be like is, do you think that during the off season, Kilfoyl is just hammering her rise ball?
Yeah, right.
To balance it out. Like, you're out of your
Right.
damn mind, you know? So I think that's probably a really good, just like a really good example. I think she's a really good example of like how over complicated we really make it. We have pitchers that have a great drop ball, as you said, and we're like, all we want to really work on doing is blending a good off speed and commanding those two pitches. It's like they're afraid, like, well, that can't be enough.
Right.
You know, like,
It is.
you know, when
Yeah,
can I
she
learn
just
something?
shut
that's
out
tough?
the
When
best.
can I
Pretty sure
learn?
Texas was averaging like 5 runs a game or something
Right.
before that.
Yeah,
She
I'm like,
just
no,
shut them
it
out
is
twice,
enough.
so.
It
Yeah.
is enough. If it's enough, great. You know, like if it's
Right.
not enough, great, then it might not be enough. But if it is enough, then it's enough. So
Right.
yeah, I think that's a really good message. And I often think that like when we're in a debrief setting with pitchers, the ones that really buy into that message of like sometimes less is more, they're like, oh, thank God. You know, like it's so overwhelming for them. Like, I need this pitch and I need this pitch is good, but this pitch isn't good. I'm like, well, then toss that. You know, like
Right.
you'd stop chasing all the things. So yeah, I think it's important. I think it's just like, you know, from the seat that we sit in, we're often like open, like it's time for us to really look at pitching with open eyes. Like, look what's in front of us instead of just keep relying on all the like myths and things we always thought about pitching or what pitching used to look like. It did look different. And
Yeah.
so I just think I love to see different, I don't know, different pitchers in the game like Kilfoyl who would just really break the mold of
Yeah.
what it used to be a decade ago and beyond.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to go into Duke here. So Duke, I think, was ranked in the NCAA rankings as 2 this week, which I think is has to be their highest ranking. Yeah,
It is, yeah.
Yeah. So really exciting. We've obviously worked with Duke, with their pitching staff for this is our 3rd year. So just curious, from both of your standpoint, you guys obviously work a little more intimately with them, of some of your like thoughts and reflections on things that they've maximized their like growth over the past few years. What you think maybe are some of the insights that's led to that? Just, you know, obviously they've been pretty steady, like on this like steady climb. So I think that's really cool and awesome to see. And just curious your reflections. So Ash, take it away. You start.
This this podcast really should be like the
Ash show. No, just kidding.
no, or I was gonna say pitching, not the Ash show. But,
Yeah.
Okay, well, there's a lot of things. You guys know that I really love and respect the coaching staff at Duke for a variety of reasons. Actually, my last call with them, I got off and reflected. I had a minute where I just thought, like, I really appreciate them. There's a couple things. They dig. And what I mean by that is, like, they dig for answers. They don't expect that what was the plan in November is just going to stay the plan. They keep assessing where their where their athletes are. They understand the tolls that the season takes and they know that can influence what their pitchers can and cannot do. And they go back to the drawing board of how to resurrect a pitch or, maximize what she currently has on the table. They understand the implications of, she used to have, didn't have horizontal on that pitch and now she does. And now she's struggling against lefties and now they're really thoughtful. They dig really hard. I think obviously I have a ton of respect for Marissa for a variety of reasons. But she has also a little Wizard of Oz, I would say, in Nicole, who actually Wizard of Oz is like, the person behind the curtain. But Nicole is so smart and they work as a really great team. There is no like ego. It's such a team environment. They're vulnerable to what they know, what they don't know. I just respect the hell out of them. I really do. Especially Marissa has had so much on her plate personally. And for her, for her to have invested the time in Nicole over the last several years, to know that Nicole has likely had to play a little bit of a bigger role on the staff this year. And just, she's great. I mean, she's really great and her heart is in it. Her passion is in it. When we talk about their athletes, we talk about their performance. We talk about things that are shifting, how to go back after them, the training strategies. Do they have enough variability in their training? Are they doing their plyos appropriately? Are we following their power profiles throughout season? Are we watching for fatigue? They know these concepts, but they also talk about their athletes as like humans. They say things like, I don't know, they're real, like about being connected to them as human beings, and as people, and about caring for them. I always enjoy my calls with them. Like I said, I just think they are doing such a great job. They have great athletes. I mean, it's his Duke. I also love, just like when we go to Duke, I'm like, this place is like on top of the world to me. Just like the high academics, the people walking around there, to me, they're just rock stars. They're professors, they're administrators, they're coaches, they're athletes. To me, it's a rock star campus. And I love a culture like that. This is like super high academic standards meets high athletic standards. And so I think, they have great athletes, but they have smart athletes, and their coaches are the same. So that's what I have to say about them. I obviously don't say things I don't mean. And so I'm not just bringing this up like, oh, let me tell you why they're number 2. They work really, really hard, and lots of people work hard, but I think they just have the right dynamic. They think about the right things. They lean on information that they feel confident in. They go after the information they don't feel confident in. A+ in my book for them. I've thought that for years, obviously, and working for them. And it's just amazing. Like, they're a brand new program.
Yeah.
Like, I love that. It's like sometimes I forget about that, because it's like Duke, and you always think of Duke as just being like a powerhouse and everything. But, it was like less than 10 years ago, they didn't have a field. So there's just something really special about that place. I feel it like in my soul every time we walk on campus. Like, I feel the blue, the Duke Blue Devil like energy inside of me. And huge fan, really proud of them. And I admire the hell out of them. That's for sure.
Yeah.
My perspective is probably not as vocal and long as Ashley's will be. She
Sorry.
works a little more intimately with that that coaching staff. But as someone who's been on that campus 3 years in a row now, and to have the privilege of seeing their staff evolve and change and grow, it's always amazing to me every time we go back. It's just, there's so many things that are so fundamental to those pitchers that they do so well. But, as you said, Ash, like, they're not afraid to grow. They're not afraid to, dig and look for things that are going to make any one of their pitchers stand out and be special. And, sometimes we go to campuses and we sort of see the same thing over and over again, year to year. And I never feel that way about Duke. I always feel like there's just this undertone of like, what's next? How are we just driving to get better every single time? And, you would think 3 years in a row with some of the same pitchers each year that things would look the same, and they do a little bit, but there are some really amazing tools underneath what they do, and not afraid to leverage the resources that they have and just take a risk, take a leap of faith.
Yeah.
And it's paying off for them.
They're also a great example of like lean into who you are. I mean, they like their pitchers really understand what they are, and what their tools are and how they work together as a staff.
Wasn't it Kurt? She got interviewed and they were like, you're throwing your rise ball or something. She like corrected the announcer. Like, no,
it's like not actually a rise ball.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just my fastball that I elevate. Like, she knows.
Right.
There's no, I just think they really know there's not confusion of what a pitch is doing or is not doing. Their tools. They don't try to like create tools that don't exist. I just think it's like, it's simple where it needs to be simple, and it's really thoughtful and complex where it needs to be thoughtful and complex. So
it's like leveraging Claire as a hitter right now. She's had a role on their pitching staff, and instead of forcing her into this box of, you are just going to be a pitcher, we're going to put you in the box and you're going to be great offensively. Like, that is the using all their resources and using all their tools, and letting their staff tell them how they want to contribute. I think it's great. Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna play. So they're Daniel Laurie, who is, Ashley, I think you can talk about, like, one of your favorite pitchers ever.
Mm-hmm.
I played against Ashley. I think that Ashley's a little smaller than Danielle, but
like half the size.
Yeah, but I think similar in their intensity on the mound, competitive spirit. But Danielle posted a Twitter post that had a little bit of that like competitive spirit also meets data conversation. So we're going to play it and just talk about it. Obviously, as the people in the sort of like data space, I think it's just like a good conversation of how we use data, how we match it with competitiveness. Some of the conversation we had about Lexi Kilfoyl already, I think, started touching on this. So I'm just going to play it first. Give me 1 second here.
Know that data, analytics, Rapsodo, all of these things are a huge piece in our game right now. But can I tell you a little secret? That shit doesn't measure the bulldog mentality. It doesn't measure the absolute beast mode. It doesn't measure how you thrive under pressure. It doesn't measure how you choose to respond through failure. Okay? It is a small piece that sometimes we get too caught up in, but do not forget, confidence is gained through preparation. How hard are you willing to work? So when you get into those moments of pressure, you feel effing invincible. It's awesome. I love that Rapsodo and the analytics, and that is starting to change our game. But do not forget how big of a badass you are. Do not forget when you enter those lines and you set foot in that circle, there is no one better. And I feel like people are missing that piece because data seems to be taking over our world. Y'all are bougie bitches. Don't forget it. This message.
Okay. All right. So obviously this kind of touches on, I think, a couple different topics that we think are probably, they have some equalness to them, maybe not equal, but I think this idea of like data meets competitiveness meets things. I think one thing I thought of when I listened to it, sometimes we have kids come for assessments and they will be like, that's not how I normally throw that, right? Because they aren't like controlling it the way that they do normally or something like that. And what we always say is like, well, but the data doesn't fluctuate that much, so that's okay. And I think what they're kind of speaking on is this more like competitive, you know what you're going to get. I show up and I'm this thing each day. And this sort of like what we're talking about sometimes on the other side of that. And the data is on the foundation, though, of what that is. And our game sort of requires that they meet, I think. So I think this idea, probably what the three of us, not to speak for everyone, maybe respond more on the like negative side too, is like pinning them against each other as though it's like data versus competitiveness.
Yeah, they're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah. And I think where I do think, though, that they can live really well together is this idea that there's both. And both is, you need the data. And when we say data, it's really like what we were talking about earlier with Kilfoyl, is like you need the numbers in the same way that like you score a certain way to get into a college. You need some level of the numbers. So from a hitting standpoint, if you're hitting the ball and you're not a slapper, so maybe an asterisk, you don't have speed or something, and you are hitting the ball in the 50s, you're not going to go play at Texas. You're not going to go play at Duke. Like that's just not going to happen because you're not going to have success. Their defense is too good. All of these things are good. And it really doesn't matter how competitive you are unless you have something else, because if you're going to put the ball in play, you're still going to get thrown out. And so I think you have to hit these sort of baseline numbers that we know have success at that level. But then you get to that stage and now you're with a group of people who all have those numbers. Okay, now it's like who has the edge here? That's kind of my take on it, which is, of course, I think Danielle is one of the most competitive, obviously, bulldog type pitchers ever, always sort of was out there. But also she threw the ball 70, high 60. So she did have some of the edge that allowed her to be successful on that stage, a very plus change up, those types of things. So yeah.
I was going to add, you're right. I've always loved Danielle Lars. She's the same age as us. So we obviously, like when we were the same grad year. And
watched her the season.
Yeah. And we were like pitching at that time. There were like things about like, being like a princess, things like that. It used to always drive me crazy because I used to think like, we're out here competing our asses off like 5 games a day, like where did this princess shit come from? That's how I always used to think, right? Like I used to drive me crazy. I don't know if anybody knows me, but that's probably not the way that anyone would probably describe me, And so I always just felt like in 2009 when Danielle Lari came back from the Olympics, so she came back in 2009 and she won the national championship, like she was like angry. And not like I'm obsessed with that, you know, like she was just like angry out there. Like she looked like she hated the hitters across from her. And I just felt like she was a great representation of, to me, what an actual pitcher is. So this idea of like a pitcher is, oh, she's soft and she doesn't hit, and some weird, I don't know who like came up with these descriptions of pitchers like in our era. But the way I felt inside as a pitcher was like what Danielle Laurie looked like on the outside, you know? And so I've always just like loved that about her. And I do think I have two comments about this. One is that she's right in the sense of you can't just have numbers and you can't and forget about the soul of a pitcher. So there are many times where I am on a call, particularly like college consulting calls, and like we know an athlete's data. We know she's got the stuff. But when it comes down to like, she should be your closer, she should come in that last time through the lineup with this. And we just know that like when shit gets hard, she falls apart. That's real. Yep. So there is this element of like, absolutely, no matter, we're not saying you can excel at a certain stage without the numbers, but you absolutely can flop on that stage with the numbers if you don't have the spirit and like the warrior mentality. That's the first thing that I heard essentially when I listened to that from her. The next thing I thought of was my dad. And so my dad, who is a crazy Philadelphia sports fan, just like screaming.
I said, if you looked up the definition, I always say this about John, is if you looked up the definition for like man from Philadelphia, like his picture would be in it with a Budweiser. He's like in the
dictionary. Yeah.
Screaming at the Eagles.
This would not be allowed on this podcast. Yeah, this wouldn't be allowed on this podcast, but actually a family friend sent me a video of him on opening day of the Phillies. No. I mean, out of control. I wouldn't even be allowed to bring him on this
John
podcast.
John Tovar be a host on this podcast sometime.
Totally. Yeah. Anyway, so
that would be the highest rated. We go viral.
Yeah. When we are having discussions about things in baseball, he's screaming because that's how he communicates. But he will get really angry if the manager, for example, like leans on the analytics too much. He's like, where's your soul? Like, open your eyes. Like, don't lose the feel for the game. And there's an element of that where I hear him. So what I said to him, because he'll sometimes get so pissed that he'll say something like, you know, screw the data and this, like baseball's in your soul, it's in your bones, you know. He's an old school dude. And so then I'll say to him, like, Dad, let me ask you a question though. This is a little weird to be talking to me about this. Like, I live in this world of data and maximizing data. Do you think that those pitchers, for example, shouldn't be spending their time training, trying to maximize, look at camera, figure out where their hands? Like, oh, no, that's not what I'm talking about. When he's talking about data, he is separating in-game analytics and decision-making versus like player development concepts. They're totally different. He would never argue against training using technology to maximize your tools. Like, obviously, he's like, well, you need to do that in today's game, right? So, but what he's talking about is like choosing this guy, not choosing to bunt, whatever those things, going with this pitcher as a closer instead of this one because the numbers say it, but you know that's not the decision. So there is a difference. There is a difference. And so I think that it's important to differentiate these two concepts of the reality is there is no such thing as not having tools that are good enough. We are not seeing pitchers excel on stages with tools that don't match up. We're not. We know their tools now, right? We know what data is about, is understanding if you want to play at this level, we now know what it looks like, right? At least from a data standpoint. The soul piece, different, but we know what it looks like. So there's no, you can have less than that and succeed because we're not seeing that in the game. But there is this element of like, yes, she has the tools to come in and match with this person, but no, she doesn't have the soul to be able to be in that pressure environment. So I do think it is important to not just be like data as this blanket concept. In-game decision-making using in-game analytics is something different than player development. The soul of a pitcher 100% is necessary, is needed, is critical, but it doesn't make up for a lack of tools. And also, even if Danielle Laurie said something totally asinine, I'm still a fan.
Yeah.
That's my mic drop on that one.
Yeah. I was going to say, I was thinking of high school hitters. A lot of times, I think where this like conversation of competitiveness versus data first even like patterns and where you are and that type of thing, like triggers me, I guess, a little bit with the high school, is that sometimes people will be like, she just doesn't compete hard enough, or like she'll take a pitch, right? So she'll take strike 3 and I'm talking more specifically here in the youth level. And they'll be like, oh, you know, she just took that. She didn't even compete. She didn't even try. And there's something about her swing, right, that we know from measuring that literally makes it impossible for her to judge that pitch, that makes it look like a strike to her, that sort of causes that. And we just like then critique the person's character, almost like her competitiveness. And we haven't given her the tools to be able to compete at that level. And so sometimes at the youth, I see that a lot, where almost not, I don't want to say always, but a lot of times, I think over 50% of the time, when we are really looking at swing decisions, they are mechanics, patterns, sort of physically based that we can measure, right? So this is another way to look at data, videos, data, like all of this. We can measure and see that, like, it's not surprising that she took that pitch. It's not surprising that she swung at a rise ball over her head. It's not because she wasn't competing hard enough or didn't want it enough. It's because literally her swing makes her have to make a decision too soon. That hole is in there. And so if we attack that, then she'll be able to compete harder from what it looks like on the outside. So I think sometimes also we merge these concepts of like what they can do with saying like we're not competitive. So sometimes I think Danielle's using it as this empowering. I think that that's right. Like you gotta have the tools and to be able to compete, and in an empowering way, that's amazing. In the youth level, sometimes we use this as a like, we put them down because of it. We say you're not competing hard enough, and that's why you're not good enough. But we haven't showed them of like, you are competing hard, you just can't do it yet. And so let's make you be able to do it. And I think that we see that a lot. I would say like, I really feel pretty confident that like 70% or more of the time that you see a kid take a pitch or make a bad swing decision, it is physically based. It's not mentally based. And we get really hung up on this like mental aspect, and we don't show them how to get rid of the tools. And then now you have a kid feeling bad of like, oh, I just like, I'm not competing hard enough, or I didn't try hard
I will
enough,
just say asterisk on that is that pitching's a different beast, and you have to be a different beast. There is this element that like, if you're a parent and your daughter's like, I want to be a pitcher. And now granted they're young and, you know, whatever. But as they're growing older, it's not just about like, do they have the tools? Are they, you know, did they have the physicality? It's like, can they handle that circle? Like it is that circle is fire. It is like, that ball is in your hands. When you talk about there is absolute chaos and everyone is staring at you to get it under control. I mean, it takes a different beast. And so the piece of that, like the real positive piece that I heard from Danielle in that is that just like, don't forget that. You can have the data, but you can't rely solely on that. What that position requires is someone that just gets knocked down, right back up. Knocked down, right back up. It is absolutely critical. So she's right about that part. And I think that that is important to remember. And again, it's not the same as you can have that part. I, for example, would be a great example, had the spirit,
you're right. You had it.
I had the spirit of Danielle Laurie and definitely not the size and the tools. I could not have won.
5'3" frame.
Exactly. I could not have won a national championship for the University of Washington. You know what I'm saying? Like, it is not even a question. I could not
how much you gave them the middle finger and
100%.
crow hopped
as
your
angry as I would have been out there, I could never have done it. And I think that's a great example of that, right? And so I could have like emotionally gone, you know, head to head with someone like Danielle Laurie as far as competitiveness, but her, you know, tools, it's just not even on the same book, you know? So that's a great example, I'd say.
All right. I'm going to cut us off because we got to get, sorry, Laura, but I got to get to our question. So we're doing questions of the day every time, and I got to get to it before we run out of time here. So today, the first question is from our dear friend Trish Ford, and actually she sent me more than one. She's really using her time, so we're only gonna do one today. But
talk about leveraging your resources. Yeah,
she's like, actually, I got multiple. So we just asked people, really gave them sort of free reign to ask whatever they wanted, whether it was you know, very specific to pitching, hitting, something like that, whether it was a little more generic to women in business, women in sports, whatever. So in the pitching topic, we're really going all pitching today. Trisha's questions about pitching. And since it's
Yeah,
already,
sure.
we're hitting towards what we said we were going to make the limit of this. This is not a short conversation, I don't think. So I'm going to go ahead and play her question, and then we will, Laura, I'll let you answer first since we've been cutting you off. So you can have the first feedback on this. So, all right, give me a second here. Get it going.
Okay, I'm going to ramble here, but if
A little higher.
we start looking at softball and the complexity of the move, as Ashley would say, you have a double turn once in the air. At the youth level, what does this start to look like from a load management side? In baseball at the youth level, they have a pitch count. Are you or are you not in favor of a pitch count? And are you a proponent of larger staffs, i.e. like in baseball, in which we are a little more cognizant of the toll that pitching in general takes on the body?
Man, that's a
Good
great
one,
question.
Trisha. Yeah.
It's a really great question. Yeah, my first instinct is to say like, yes, 100% pitch counts, but I think there's an asterisk to it. I think not every pitch is created equal, right? So, the youth pitcher who, maybe is not throwing quite high velocity for her age or for where she is developmentally, the stress her body experiences is not the same as maybe someone who, was an early bloomer and is, genetically very gifted to be tall and long levers. And, her velocity is well beyond where her peers are. And so those two pitch counts aren't really created equal, right? There's sort of this asterisk of the intensity of the velocity that's expressed for that kid. So I think pitch counts they're a start, but we know this in baseball too, that even the I'm blanking on the name of it, the SMART guidelines.
Yes.
I'm blanking on that full
That's
name.
what it's called, I think, the pitch smart.
Yeah, pitch smart. I mean, there's you know me, I'm going to go to the published research, but there is plenty of evidence that shows that like baseball's not even following that well at the youth level. So like pitch counts are a start, but I think until we really start to understand that the motion doesn't always have to be at 100%, right? That I think that's probably one of the most powerful things that has come out of the work that we've done over the last few years is really understanding submaximal stuff. And so yes, pitch counts are a start, but I think pitch counts just assume that everything is at 100%. And so if you're only counting the 100% pitches in a game, you're missing such a factor of workload. And so I think our workload conversation has to move beyond pitch counts and has to be about the actual physical stress that body is experiencing, because not every pitch is created equal for each pitcher in terms of what they're expressing. And it's tricky. It's a tricky thing to manage when, in baseball, you can take a center fielder and put him on the mound and he's throwing overhand. But, softball pitching is a different beast. It's not the same skill that anybody else on the field has. And so when you find that one kid that can throw and throw strikes, you're going to use her, of course. But again, not every pitch is created equal. And so I just think the pitch count conversation is a start, but we have to have a much more holistic view of workload management. The things we talk with our own athletes about, other sports, training loads, being in season, travel teams, all of that. It's holistic. It's got to be a much larger than that.
I was just going to say, obviously, the topic of incentives in youth sports is gonna it will fire me up. And I think that we are human beings who cannot see long term. No matter what everyone tells you to do, we are incentivized by what is right in front of us. And we don't make good decisions as human beings often for our long-term well-being unless we are incentivized in some way to see that as something we have to follow. And so I think that while there's definitely nuances to things like pitch counts and the conversations we've had from governing bodies has been like, show us the data first and all of this. It's like, you have to incentivize, you have to make it required for youth coaches to follow something or no change will ever happen. Because if right in front of me is I win or I sit through misery of this kid walking someone, I'm going to choose winning. And it doesn't matter if you tell me that kid's going to get hurt in 6 years. It doesn't matter if you tell me the game's not going to grow because I'm not developing enough pitchers. I'm going to do the path of least resistance. I'm going to do what makes the parents not all bitch at me from the stands. I'm going to do what gives me the awards because the kids want the awards. I sit on these conversations at the youth level, and all we talk about is accolades and national championships and all of these things. And when we're talking about growing the game, you have to incentivize away from that in order for them to have incentives to build staffs. And building a staff at a youth level is freaking hard for all the reasons you said. People don't know how to pitch. They don't know how to throw strikes. They're developing at all different levels. Sally's throwing it sideways, but Susie's throwing 64 strikes down the middle. Why wouldn't I choose Susie? You know, she's going to make me win. And so until you create structure and systems that require us to start building staffs, it's never going to happen. And we're going to have this conversation in 10 years and 20 years and 30 years. And so I think like there's a reason that there's regulation for things that impact our like long-term health. And at the youth softball level, there's not a lot of regulation here. And so we can do whatever the hell we want,
general.
you know?
Yeah,
and I think I watched at the 18U level, a kid last year at the national championship throw 4 games in a row, and everyone posted it on Twitter and talked about, you know, how tough she was and all of this, and it was celebrated. And then, you know, you have 10U and 12U where you're not incentivized to build staffs because there's no rules against what we're doing. And so you don't have to. You just keep riding Susie, and Susie's parents aren't upset because they also are short-term focused. You know, like it's hard to have this long-term. It's just human nature. I'm not really even knocking the decisions. Maybe in some cases I am, but for most of them, it's just like it's human nature to see what's short and to do the path of least resistance. And so I think that's why, you know, we had to start with something. And so I would say like 100% pitch counts are where you have to start, because then all of a sudden I'm taking a 12U team and I start to rethink what travel ball, what youth softball looks like, because I'm like, oh, I can't make a team. I don't have enough pitchers. Well, maybe we need to sit in a room and talk about why that is, you know, and start having the right conversation. So I think my gut for this question doesn't even like we know it's complex. We know pitchers are hurt. We know we're running into the issue. I don't think there are questions around this anymore. We know we're asking pitchers how their bodies feel when they're adults and they're in pain and they're hurting and all of these things. Like this isn't question anymore. But the question is like, how will we create the right structure and incentives for these youth coaches, parents, athletes to have to start making some change here? And I don't see any way besides pitch counts, to be honest, because I think it's a way to start. So that's my sense. Ash?
Yeah, I won't rehash, but it's a no-brainer to me. I just, for what you said, we now know this like myth of it's a natural motion. Talk about triggering phrase.
You're talking about triggering.
This is like trouble
Yeah.
there.
It's not.
Sit
It's
on a pillow right now. Yeah.
Right.
Sit
No,
on a
it's
pillow, you're
incredible.
like-
I have like a stress ball that I'm squeezing in the background on.
Yeah.
But no, it's not a natural motion. It's like, yes, just because we don't have the same, you know, joint forces at the elbow, it's incredibly demanding on the body. I think not having pitch counts, particularly at the youngest of ages, is like damn near abusive. It's just wild. I think of like even without like health and wellness in mind, although that's at the center of this conversation, to give us a shot in hell at having like the number of pitchers that we have at the high school level. They're like, I'm the only high school pitcher.
Right.
We have
talk about trying to make a
42
pro
games.
league, or trying to talk about,
We have
we're talking about
42
growing the
games,
game.
and I'm the only one. I literally said, what if you have the flu? They're like, they'll reschedule the games. I'm like, they'll reschedule the games? Like, what if your period is bad one day? And you're like, what are you talking about? Like, that is like what is the case that we're in with a lot of our high school pitchers. So even with health and wellness aside, the pool is so small because if you don't cut it, I'm riding Sally. And like, I don't care that Sally is just good because, you know, she's more developed, maturationally developed, you know, when she's 9 versus you. I think all of that is just a joke. So to me, pitch counts are a absolute no-brainer. In my mind, I don't judge the fact we don't have pitch counts yet. We're slowly getting there and pushing from an information standpoint, but it is damn well, I would say, I would call it abusive. not to put some restrictions, particularly at these really young ages, grow the pool of pitchers, give us a shot in hell at the high school level, and then obviously beyond, to have more than a single arm to take on all the stuff. Because if it's not a health and wellness issue early on, which it often is, it certainly is by the time they're 15, 16, because they're one of one by the time they have a 40-game schedule. So
yeah, and I think it's interesting. Like I think the last thing I'll say on this is, as coaches, I think sometimes the feedback we get is that, like, the coaches will be so upset because they won't have solutions. I coach in the youth level. I would think like, oh, thank you.
everybody else,
pitch counts.
right?
Because then it's like, oh, I can't throw her, And so now if everyone's mad, it's like, well, let's have a conversation around why we lose every time Susie doesn't throw, Like, let's have a conversation around these things. And so I think there's some, if I was a parent or a coach, I would be pushing so hard for this because it gets us all aligned and it protects you. It puts this sort of like air of protection around a decision that is correct. It has high integrity.
About the conversations you and I have had where you'd call me and be like, if I pitch such and such, that's our chance to win, but I can barely look at myself in the mirror.
Yeah.
Like, she is done for the weekend. Like, how can I do that to her? Then all of a sudden that decision is off your plate of like, do I choose the team who wants to win, or do I listen to my soul, which is telling me like, you're a person of integrity. Don't do that to that kid,
Right.
Yeah.
One of the most powerful things I think I've ever heard you say, Krista, about like the travel ball scene is like pitcher health and winning games are mutually exclusive. Like it does not, like the travel ball world is
totally
set up for pitcher health. It does not have, I'll even expand that to athlete health, because there are plenty of times where it's not even, pitching specific, but that just the nature of, 8-hour practices on a Saturday, and then we're going to play 11 games. It's not set up for athletes to thrive and feel like they have a handle on their performance. They're constantly just chasing one tier of less fatigue to the next tier of less fatigue. It's not thriving. And it's one of the most powerful things I think I've ever heard you say about just like those things are mutually exclusive. It's like,
we choose
you're
to
going
lose.
to prioritize.
Right now. And I don't think this has to be forever. And I think that's the conversation of getting pitch counts going so that at this 10U, 12U, we start saying like, we got to teach the whole staff to pitch. We got to have a part of warmups where everyone's throwing underhand. I think Joe Kinsella, who's at Lake Forest, he used to talk about at the youth level, part of his warm-ups was that they all threw underhand, which is great. I think you need this part where you start forcing that at the youth level so that that statement, Laura, becomes untrue at the 16U, 18U level, because now I have a staff of 6, 7, 8 kids that could throw and really contribute because we haven't weeded them all out at the youth level, at the level under it. But right now I have a staff of 4 this year, and that's huge, but it's not. I will overthrow those kids every weekend, like from what actually I think their bodies can take. And so I just think, it's just why we need to start forcing it. And it will create some real conversations, because suddenly if you put those in play, my little area goes from 25 teams to 10, and this conversation about what it means to grow the game changes. Are we growing the game, or are we just spreading out the players, and we're putting one pitcher here and one pitcher here, and we're building a team around that kid. And I think you start to not be able to do that. And I think we start to have some really healthy conversations for what it looks like to actually grow youth softball, and what it looks like. And I think pitch counts are a massive start. And then I think we're going to wrap up here, and then we can't get into this. I think there's some complications of how we would enforce pitch counts in our current setup and governing bodies and tournament sanctions and all of this, which is what baseball, I think, is running into with their ability to enforce that. But I think, let's start somewhere. Let's put it in place. Let's start somewhere, and let's start having conversations. Let's start when I realize, oh, I couldn't play in this tournament and follow this, that I start looking around and asking questions of how we're going to build bigger staffs. And I think we got to do it. We got to have kids not hurt. We got to have the stars. I think I shared on our thing. A sports scientist said, like, in order for the game to grow, you got to have the stars playing. And if the stars are hurt, they're not playing, that's not good for our game. It's not good for our game to have our stars out. So we got to keep building the pool so that when they're 18 to hopefully 35, 40, that the stars are in the show. And I think that that's a really important piece. So,
shout out to Trisha, who we all love, as we know, for asking a question that gets to the, like, literally the root of the game. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
She could have
Yeah.
sat way up top here, and she went all the way to the root. So
Yeah.
I love that about her. Yeah.
Yep, for sure. All right. Well, we hit on a lot.
Yep.
All pitching. So I don't this is unfortunately probably I'll really try to hold the fort down for
We'll have
something
to be
else.
a little
But
intentional to maybe bring
yeah.
in something else.
yeah, but we'll keep trying to hit on different things. But appreciate everyone listening, and until next week when we got next week's hot topic. So we'll see Texas Oklahoma this weekend. So maybe we'll come back to that series next week. So all right, see you next week.